Buju, Kinamagian and Ireland Indigenous, and welcome to this production of Social Studies Explorer. Today's topic, the Middle Passage. Today's topic is going to cover the Middle Passage and also some of the effects that slavery had on West Africa. So let me grab my annotation tool here. We remember yesterday that the first path was from Europe to Africa, mostly along the west coast or the Atlantic coast. Today we're also going to cover this. This here is going to be known as the Middle Passage. This is the worst part of the journey, as it was the part where slaves were emigrated out of Africa by the millions and forced to move away from their families, away from their culture and their community, and stuck over here in North America. So that's the one we're going to focus on today. The first part, I want to talk about the effect of slavery in Africa, as it is a part that is largely ignored when we cover this content, or at least it was when I was a student. And again, this is linked to the museum in Liverpool, the National Museum. It is linked as a result of the Michigan Open Book Project. So one of the things that was traded into Africa was weapons. By providing firearms amongst the trade goods, Europeans increased warfare and political instability in West Africa. Some states, such as Asante and Dahomey, grew powerful and wealthy as a result. Other states were completely destroyed and their populations decimated as they were absorbed by rivals. Millions of Africans were forcibly removed from their homes, and towns and villages were depopulated. Many Africans were killed in slaving wars or remained enslaved in Africa. Many states, including Angola under Queen Nzinga, Nabande, and Congo, strongly resisted slavery. However, the interests of those involved in trade proved too great to overcome. About 2/3 of the people sold to European traders were men. Fewer women were sold because their skills as farmer and craft workers were crucially important in African societies. The burden of rebuilding their violated communities fell to these women. So if I was going to highlight the impact of Africa, or on Africa, let's make sure I get a little thicker one here. Increased warfare and political instability. States completely destroyed. Populations decimated. Millions of Africans forcibly removed from their homes. Towns and villages were depopulated, which means emptied. Many Africans were killed in slaving wars or remained enslaved in Africa. And I'd also note about 2/3 of the people sold to European traders were men. This is in no means a deep and expansive look at the impact on Africa, but it is a small thing that you could actually further research on your own. It is important to understand the consequences of the triangular trade on Africans as well as on Native Americans and colonists and Europeans as well. I'll go ahead and clear this. Now moving into the Middle Passage itself. And this material comes from the Social Studies Mesa. It's a previous curriculum that we have used. Workers were needed in the English colonies. There were goods like rum that were available to trade, and triangular trade routes were established. All of these work into effect African cultures, villages, and families were negatively affected, as we just talked about. It resulted in the colonies in the New World, which is the Americas, North and South, in the Caribbean. They prospered and grew. And it did also result in African ideas and traditions were brought to the colonies. And we're going to talk a little deeper in the preservation of those traditions in a upcoming lesson. So let's look at a description of one of the voyages in the Middle Passage. At last, when the ship we were in had got in all her cargo, they made ready with many fearful noises, and they were all put under deck, so that we could not see how they managed the vessel. But this disappointment was the least of my sorrow. The stench of the hold while we were on the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time. And some of us had been permitted to stay on the deck for the fresh air. And now that the whole ship's cargo were confined together, it became absolutely pestilential. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship, which were so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains, now became insupportable. The shrieks of the women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole a scene of horror, almost inconceivable. I want you to ponder on that for just a moment. In no way does this sound like any method of how to treat a human being, but yet many ancestors of today's Americans had this experience. More than 12 million Africans were put on ships and sent across the Atlantic, 2 million of which may have died at sea. Triangular trade, as we've kind of talked about, this Middle Passage is where the enslaved Africans, and while this map points at the West Indies, that's the Caribbean, they could have gone up to any number of places. This version kind of cuts out the English part and has an alternative where rum, guns, cloth, and tools are going to West Africa, and that's only with permission of the king. Enslaved Africans coming here. Sugar is coming from the West Indies to New England, and New England is selling lumber, fish, and flour this way. Keep in mind the West Indies were also colonies of the European powers. So you could look at triangular trade both in the concept of it connecting the Americas, Europe over here in West Africa, or the colonies, West Africa and the West Indies. All depended on the time and the permissions of the king. Here's a note by a captain from 1755, and this is going to be one of the slavers. The sloop here of which you are master being loaded and ready to sail, our orders there that you improve the first favorable wind in weather and proceed directly to the coast of Africa, where being arrived you are at liberty to trade at such places as you think most of your interest. Funny they use the word liberty. Don't purchase any smaller old slaves, or as far as possible, young men slaves answer better than women. Keep a watchful eye over them and give them no opportunity of making an insurrection, which is where you rebel against the horrors that you're being put under. And let them have a sufficiency of good diet. As you are sensible, your voyage depends upon their health. Use your utmost endeavors to make all the dispatch possible as your vessel is small and your expenses great, and proceed from the coast to Charlestown in South Carolina, where we shall lodge letters for you containing instructions for your further proceedings. We recommend that to you the utmost frugality in your expenses on the vessel. We also entreat you to use your utmost endeavors to promote peace, harmony, and good order on board, both your officers and others, especially the officers. Don't omit writing us by all opportunities. We wish you health and a prosperous voyage. Who are your friends? Long story short, they looked at this as a business transaction. Don't spend too much on keeping everyone alive, but make sure everyone stays alive. There's more concern given to the staff on the boats than there are to the hundreds and maybe even thousands of people that are stowed inside of her. One of the things coming up is going to be a triangular trade assessment. And this will be in tomorrow's lesson, but I wanted you to see it today. What have you learned about and it can be just this lesson or in more recent ones, an informational piece about triangular trade. You will need to include the trade routes, the people and goods that were traded, the Middle Passage, its impact on life in Africa. Make sure you introduce the topic clearly. You have facts, definitions, details, and other information. Use you may, if you're typing the version, you may use headings, illustration, or other formatting techniques. Precise language and vocabulary, strong concluding statement. Make sure that you describe the trade routes. Where are they going? Describe the people and goods that were traded, the Middle Passage, and the impact of triangular trades. I want you to be thinking about this today because in tomorrow's lesson, that's what's going to be coming up for you. I do understand that this is a tough topic. It's not fun on the teaching end because of how horrible this whole thing was. Slavery is one of those numerous stains on our history, but one that we need to understand as to avoid repeating the sins of our ancestors. We want to make sure that as a nation that we appreciate all the people have sacrificed for us. And when I talk about the people, we're not talking about the slavers. We're talking about, in this case, the Africans that were stolen from their homes and shipped over here. So be cognizant of that. And when you're reading about this and when discussing this, it's not a topic that's fun in any way, shape, or form. I will have more information with the project tomorrow. Have a minute, Gijigad, and Bamapi.